and welcome to Adventures with Scars. I'm your host, Lauren Huffmaster. Adventures with Scars is a discussion on the invisible side effects of cancer, the emotional side effects. Last season, I presented my philosophy on the aspects of the cancer experience that are difficult to put into words. I defined what is invisible and presented a timeline of how we heal from the trauma of cancer. In this season, I'm talking with patients, survivors, and co-survivors. These discussions help us all better understand the experience of cancer. Because we are some of the first people to live with cancer, even metastatic cancer for years at a time, it is important for us to talk about our experience. This podcast is specifically interested in whether or not the invisible side effects of cancer are real. So we're talking to patients, survivors, asking whether they want to confirm or disagree with my philosophy. And today I'm talking with Shana Bowman-Carroll. Shana has been living with metastatic breast cancer and is so funny, and you're going to love the stories and all the things she's done with her years impacted by cancer. Shana, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, first, tell us a little bit about your cancer story.
Okay. I feel like I need to go back a little bit just to kind of give you the scope of it and perhaps where I first, I guess, had the word cancer kind of enter my mind or my framework. And so I have 4 children. My oldest will turn 12 in a couple weeks. And I have the youngest is 5. So for many years, I was pregnant and or breastfeeding. There was rarely a time that I wasn't doing both. So I was having regular checkups. I saw midwives. I saw OBGYNs. I feel like I kind of got like the widest variety of care, and it felt really, really, I want to say like robust, but I felt like I was in the best of care. So I didn't really think about cancer too much. But in between my last baby, we had lost a baby before that. And I remember thinking that after we went through the delivery and we went through the pathology and there were no indications whatsoever that there was anything wrong with the baby, that I just, in my mind, thought, well, there must be something wrong with me because there was no explanation. So I don't know if that was like, that intuition or that gut instinct, or whether or not it was just the need to have something to blame. And so I ended up, because cancer does run in my family on my dad's side, breast cancer specifically, I did go to a geneticist and said, hey, we just lost this baby, can you look at me and see if there's anything wrong with me? And she kind of laughed and thought I was a Looney Tune. And I felt, I completely understand. But when I went through my family history, she said, oh yeah, there's some there, but insurance, you don't qualify for genetic testing through insurance. There's not enough, familial history there, and they were older. So, at 30 something, we're not really looking at that. So she did give me the option if I wanted to pay out of pocket and go through. And then, everybody else talked me off the cliff and said, this isn't silly. Like, why would you do that? This is, just you desperate wanting to have a reason for losing a baby. And so fast forward, I got pregnant shortly thereafter, had this amazing rainbow baby. I had a baby at home. It was perfect. It was the first time throughout all the deliveries, and I had one at the hospital, with drugs, the other 2 in one in a bathtub, one on a toilet. It looks like she's actually coming out of the toilet. And then this last one at home. So I feel like I have like the gamut of like all birthing experiences. But the last one at home was the first time I felt like, oh my goodness, somebody get me to the hospital. I cannot do this. I was absolutely just exhausted. I did have the baby. The bath that I was sitting in, it was inflatable. It did start to leak. So I had to jump up really quickly. We almost flooded the house. That's another story. But we had our house under contract. And so at 1 week, we loaded up this newborn and we moved. So I was already exhausted from the birth. I moved with a 1-week-old. when I think about it, I mean, I don't think I've ever not been tired, but I was really exhausted. But I feel like there was a lot of reasons for that. So we get out to California, feel like we're on an island. We have no friends, no family. We still have 4 kids. I show up places smelling and looking like just atrocious. I mean, there was no way I was going to make friends like the way I was acting and looking. But I was just trying to survive, honestly. And I was exhausted. I was so tired. And so then, fast forward, I'm in the garage at 3 a.m. I'm drinking an icy. If somebody wants to tell me that's what caused my cancer, spoiler alert. I mean, it did not. And spoiler alert, I do have cancer. So I just ruined it. But I was in the garage till 3 a.m. listening to a podcast. And my friend Hannah in Atlanta calls me and says, "Hey, you're halfway to Australia. My husband can't go. Do you want to go with me?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, 3 a.m. sounds like a great time to make decisions. So let me go ask my husband if I can go." So I go and ask Mike. I say, "Hey, Mike, Hannah's going to Australia. Her husband can't go. Can I go?" And yeah, I mean, he thinks we're insane anyway, but it was weird, his response. He said, "Your soul needs this. We will figure it out." And I think he knew I was just, so tired from like the last, 7, 8, 9 years of, birthing babies and nursing and moving and supporting him in his endeavors, that he was like, "Yes, we'll figure this out." So I get on a plane. I fly to Australia with my friend Hannah. She is pumping because she has a newborn too. Mine is now 1 year, close to 1 year old. So we're pumping on the plane together. I feel a lump. I tell Hannah. Hannah starts pushing it, rubbing it, trying to get it out. She said, "Oh, great, you're going to ruin our trip with mastitis." And then I'm like, "Oh, great, I'm going to ruin our trip with mastitis." So we get there. And again, another spoiler alert, I did ruin the trip, but not with mastitis. It's because I never got my luggage. And for the whole time that we were there, we were going to Target on a regular basis, trying to get, clothes for me to, get through the day. But I still felt this lump every time, I went to pump. I was even in the shower, like trying to like run hot water over it. And then my friend Hannah's and they're trying to push it out. And like, then later when I found out I had cancer, Hannah did say it was her fault that it spread because she was pushing really hard on it. And apparently you're not supposed to do that. But I didn't know I had cancer still. So I fly back. I'm exhausted still. But again, I mean, I never stop. And so it makes sense. And then I go to the doctor just to see about this mastitis thing. And she sends me to the radiologist, so an ultrasound, because she said, "Hey, I just, want to do CYA, cover your ass medicine, let's just make sure that, everything's good." So I go, they do I'm by myself, so I think it's mastitis. They do the ultrasound. The radiologist comes in, he's like, "Hey, is there anybody with you?" And I'm like, "No." I mean, and even then I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Okay, well, what are your plans?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm, going to Disney World in a couple of weeks and going on a Disney cruise with my mom and the kids." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "What?" And he told me I needed to start treatment. And and he said, "You have cancer." And so that was it. I mean, that was like, since then, everything has been before that day and after that day. And the way I describe things, like, oh, before a diagnosis or after a diagnosis. So he told me I had cancer. He told me, he's been doing this for 30 years. I mean, of course, I'm going to get a biopsy and all that stuff, but I didn't need to wait to hear the news. He already knew it. So I got in my car. I hadn't cried yet. I get in my car, and my first phone call, and she probably doesn't even know this, but my first phone call was to a friend of mine in Texas, Jillian, because she had cancer. And I didn't want to call my husband. I didn't want to call my best friends. I didn't want to call my mom. I didn't want to call my sister. Definitely did not want to call my dad. I didn't want to call anybody, and except for somebody who maybe knew what it was, and then, kind of to prepare me. And so we talked for a few minutes, and then I drove home. My mom was in the backyard because, of course, she's hanging out with me and going to fly back with me and go to Disney World with me. And I walk out and she says, she's outside in the backyard talking on the phone. She hangs up the phone. She says, "Oh, you have mastitis." I said, "No, Mom." And I said, "It's cancer." And she's like, "Well, that's not what you expected." I was like, "No shit, Mom. Like, that's not what I expected. Like, at no point was that what I expected." So fast forward, you go get a PET scan, they say, "Oh, just kidding. It's not, the stage 2 that we thought it was. It's in your skull, it's in your hip, it's in your back, and that's not going to work. And, we're going to switch, plans." And then it was a whirlwind since then. And that was the first time that you were mentioned to me because we had the same oncologist. And she told me, she couldn't tell me your name because of HIPAA, but she could tell me your foundation. And so then, I stalked you from there. And so that's kind of like brings you up to speed about as far as, I guess, how I got there. And I know I shared a lot, but it's just because in my mind, I wonder if I actually knew something, back when the genetics, I went in there. The doctor said I could have had cancer for 5 to 10 years. I mean, and just not have known. I thought I was doing everything right. I was breastfeeding. I was having babies out of the hospital and like not using medicines and, eating pretty well. I ran a marathon. I was doing all the things I thought that you were supposed to do. And then I go back, I think, I wonder if I actually knew something. And then I mentioned about being so tired. I also, before going to Australia, because it had been a minute since I'd seen my friend, I didn't want her to see how fat I was. And so I was looking in the mirror and I thought to myself, and this is no lie, I think, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I'm fat, because if I was skinny or losing weight, and I was trying at the time, trying to lose a baby weight, but I thought, oh gosh, if I was losing weight or skinny, then I would know I had cancer because I'm so tired and I'd be skinny. And those are like all the things that I've heard about, as far as like, I mean, I don't know that it actually makes, that that's the only two, but those are like some of the first two I'd heard in the past about cancer. So I was still fat and I had cancer and the genetic testing came back and I do have a gene. So there's that.
And then that's when I met you, and your life has been anything but boring since that time. You hit the road, you've traveled, you've moved your family temporarily to live all over the place, and you just keep going. So now that we understand, so a lot of your diagnosis story is out of the ordinary, right? You're young. Like you said, you're running marathons, you're eating well, you're doing all the things that maybe we think we should be doing to prevent cancer, but yet young, and you have the gene, but you didn't know that. And there weren't systems in place for you to find that out early. And so I think that's a really important point of information that we need to highlight here. But I do just want to point out, were you estrogen positive?
Yes, estrogen positive.
So estrogen positive, meaning that this whole time when your body is breastfeeding and pregnant, your estrogen levels are super high, which is allowing that cancer to grow. And so a lot of women, myself included, find lumps after breastfeeding because as estrogen positive, your body has more estrogen available than typical during that season of life.
Yes, exactly. And that's what the doctor said. I mean, it's almost like it was just fuel to the fire, right? I mean, all these pregnancies, all these breastfeedings, and I didn't take a break. But the other thing too is I was getting, care, right? I was being seen all the time. So, the thought, and I had seen multiple doctors, and with the midwife, I had to see a doctor, but I had breast exams, I had all that. And to think that it just went, missed. And I will say that I was crying. I was crying in the radiologies whenever they did the biopsy, and not because of pain, but I was so embarrassed that I was in this situation. And I told him, I said, I don't know how I got here. Like, how did I miss this? Like, I'm staged. Like at this point, I'm just like, they had seen on the PET scan and stuff. It was, and I had just, I was like, how do I have this lump? And anyway, he stopped and he said, look at me. And I did. And I was like, yes, with these just acting a fool with tears all coming down my face. And he said, you self-detected, right? And I said, yes. I said, I felt a lump. he said, you deserve an applause, like pat yourself on the back. You should be proud, because I mean, I found it. And at the time, it didn't make me feel good. I felt guilty thinking I missed it. But the fact that I found it, I mean, it could have been a lot different had I not, right? I mean, had I written it off as, oh, it's a lump because I'm breastfeeding. But I actually went in because I thought, maybe it's worth getting looked at.
Yeah, this is very important. I think perhaps a lot more gynecologists should be aware of this kind of situation and be doing more breast exams for us to prevent any kind of long-term, prevent us from just writing it off. I wrote mine off for a long time. You could have written it off and given it a few more months to see if you could work it out yourself. But it's important for women to know that, especially during these seasons of breastfeeding and pregnancy, that we need to be aware. But so you're diagnosed with cancer, stage 4, and you have 4 little kids at home. What do you do next? What did you do?
So I found out on August 12th that it was metastatic. On August 14th, I had a birthday party for my son. He was turning 8. So we went to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I made his favorite meal. We, did the whole, shebang. The next day was my husband's birthday. I had my ovaries removed on his birthday. I told him happy birthday. He told me he still was thinking about getting a vasectomy. I told him he needed to go back to sex education class because I didn't think that he needed one. And then he told me that just in case, because I guess he thought maybe some rogue eggs are floating around. I'm not really sure. That's another conversation to have with him. And then, that Friday at a swim meet. Not a swim meet, at a performance. Saturday I was at a swim meet. Sunday I was at a swim meet. Life, it went on. I remember taking my son to his well visit. And I told his doctor, I just got a diagnosis, and, just kind of because like, oh, wait, does this matter in his medical history? It will at some point, but right now, let me just go ahead and tell you. And then she's like, well, what are you doing out? I said, what do you mean? I said, he has a well visit. He has a birthday, she said, well, I don't know how you do it. And I said, I don't have a choice. I'm a mom. I don't have a choice. So I get the diagnosis. Everything does start, kind of spinning and fast forward. I know at the aquarium for his birthday, I was there, but then my mind, would drift off elsewhere. But my mom was with me, and, and she's in my ear all the time saying, well, you can't do anything about it. You can't change it now. I'd find something else to worry about, like all the things in my life she's told me forever. She's still using in this moment. And so that was it. So that was immediate, couple days. And then, you slow down a little bit because you have to go to the testing, you have to go get x-rays, you have to go get, I went to, MD Anderson for a second opinion. I went to Stanford. So then like the, business of the whole, journey, takes on its own, kind of form, but we're still living. And so I don't know. It didn't really stop a whole lot. I felt privileged that I was at a place where I could take an oral medicine, that there are oral drugs out there. So I didn't have to jump right into a chemo chair. So I started doing the oral meds. It didn't really limit us from traveling. We went, we went to Hawaii. We did an RV trip for 2 weeks. We did an RV trip for a week. We went to Disney World. We went on a cruise. We've kind of just, everything kept on going for, I guess, the first 18 months that I was on the first oral drug. So I don't know if this is where we kind of want to talk about the medicine and treatment things, but I was able to live my life pretty normally for the 18 months that the combination of Kisqali and letrozole was working.
Yeah. And that is something really good for us to know, that when you are diagnosed with metastatic disease, your life may not stop right away. I remember you called me and you were like, I'm going to start Kisqali, so I'm going to cut my hair. I was like, no, stop, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not going to lose your hair. And you have you had very, very long hair. And I was so heartbroken thinking, if you hadn't called me, you might have cut all your hair off, assuming it was going to fall out right then. Because I think that's just the image we see with women with cancer. And right now, there are amazing meds out there. You can get on a medication and take it orally at home every day and continue to live your life, and with very, very little impact. And that's one of the beautiful things about the medical technology at this time. But I do want to ask you, how did your parenting shift? I think this is a huge question for people. Now that we have cancer, what do we do with our kids? How do we talk to our kids? How do we parent differently? For me, the way I see it is, as parents, it's our job to help protect our children, to keep them from being hurt. And then all of a sudden, it's part of our own story. It's the cancer that could potentially hurt them. Them figuring out what cancer means, and what them seeing us sick and us having to withdraw because we're not doing well. How are you parenting with cancer right now?
So that was, I guess, that was one of the things that, as soon as I got a diagnosis, I did talk to my kids, and they were young. I mean, right, I had one just turning 8, so that means I had an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and almost, or sorry, a 4-year-old, almost 1-year-old. And so they don't really understand. I mean, they understand cancer. They don't know stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. But I did sit down with them and talk to them immediately, and I told them, I said, look, I said, this is nothing you did. This is nothing mommy did. This is nothing daddy did. This is nothing, God did. I mean, and I said, so sorry, I cut out. I said, this is nothing anybody did. It's just something that's happened. And I said, I have, cancer. I said, you are going to hear people say, my mom had cancer, my dog died of cancer, my grandmother died of cancer. I mean, you're going to hear all of it. And I said, and that's true. I said, those things, do happen. I said, but there's also people, who have survived cancer and who keep on living with cancer. I said, you're going to hear those too. I said, in this family, I said, we tell the truth, especially when it's hard. I want them to know that I'm going to be honest with them. I try and keep it on a level, that they can understand. Sometimes I think I overestimate what they can understand, and then I definitely underestimate what they understand sometimes too. So, I mean, trying to figure out exactly where they're at. But I mean, in the short of it, I just said, this is what I have, and we're going to live each day, and none of us knows, when our last day is. And so we just have to use each day as a gift. And I don't think it was a whole lot different before a cancer diagnosis in the way that I thought like that. But I think the implementation after getting a diagnosis, I was much better at the implementation of, fulfilling those ideals that we get each day as a gift. Like I really, I think I'm a lot more intentional with that. And then I think, really probably for my kids is unfortunately, I don't know, 6 months after my diagnosis, my father passed away. And so I had to tell them, hey, Pawpaw has passed, and, we had a funeral, we had, like the whole visitation, all that. So they saw that, right? I mean, their granddad died, and they know, so they kind of knew the loss. And then, so they're kind of exposed to a lot, I feel as though heavy stuff. And then, later that year, my sister's friend died. And then, so they, we had to go through that. And so they're seeing all this death, and they're hearing their mom with a diagnosis. And I just remind them that nobody knows what days we have. And sometimes when I get in my own head, I tell myself, Kobe Bryant, I mean, he didn't get on a helicopter thinking that was his last, day. And so, I mean, I'm an ordinary person. I'm not a celebrity. I mean, but, ordinary people, celebrities, it doesn't matter. None of us know. I mean, we live in this thing called life, and we do the best we can with it. But I will say, even just yesterday, I told my kids, I said, I'm going to die one day. I'm going to die. And I said, just so you all know, I am going to die one day. And I said, but guess what? I said, so too is everybody else. It's not just me. So we have these reminders all the time when people, start, saying things. And I hear people, well, in fact, one day, one of my sister's friends told me, well, I know you have terminal cancer and all. And I was like, I said, that's true. I said, but guess what? I said, you're terminal too. Newsflash, spoiler alert. Guess what? You're going to die too. I mean, you're going to die. I said, the difference is that, statistics prepare me a little bit more saying that, hey, you may need to make the most of what you have. And so that's what I do. And I know that we're going to get into this story because it's one of my favorites. It's probably one of your favorites too. But I made a decision because I have two daughters. I have two sons and two daughters. And I think that my daughters are a little bit salty and they can be a little bit, hold grudges. And I don't want them to have that. I mean, I'm going to mess them up regardless. I don't want like cancer to mess them up. I mean, it's going to, but there's other things I'm going to do that's going to be far worse than my cancer story. I know that. But one thing I did think about, and cancer has provided this gift for me, is that there are moments, that whether or not we value or society has put on us that seem to be really remarkable, memorable moments. And I think I know that I got married and had a wedding because my father, I wanted him to walk me down the aisle. And that was like the main reason why I wanted a wedding, because I wanted my dad to have the opportunity to see me happy and walk me down the aisle. My daughters, and I know that getting to the aisles, my mom took me wedding dress shopping and she picked out my dress and we had a good time. So in thinking ahead and thinking, oh my goodness, like this may actually be a really big moment for my girls if they choose to get married, if and when, and if they, they may not, I mean, that's okay too. But I didn't want there to be, the ability to say, oh, well, my mom wasn't able to take me wedding dress shopping. So leaving out of Houston from MD Anderson after scans, I booked tickets for my girls and I to go to New York City. And I had called ahead and I made a bridal appointment on Fifth Avenue. I told them exactly why I was taking them. I said, hey, I have stage 4 cancer. I have 2 girls. I mean, they're like 8 and 6, so they're not really going to fit in anything, but it's important to me, that they have the opportunity to say they did this with their mom. And they were super accommodating. They gave us a room. They had all the dresses pulled. They let the girls try on shoes. And we did. We went up to New York City. My girls tried on dresses. It was the cutest thing in the world. They, had their little shoes. We ended up getting a nice hotel down, over in New York. We went to the American Girl doll, had lunch, went shopping. We went to the hotel, braided hair, put on our like fingernail polish. And we did like a whole experience of something that I feel like as a mom of a, of a young adult child that I would be doing with them. I just happened to do it many years earlier. But my kids won't be able to say that I didn't take them wedding dress shopping because I did. And, we have pictures and we had, just the best time, and they talk about it, often. And so I do think that these memories that I'm really intentional about and trying to make sure that we do that, they're around for a lifetime.
Yeah, I just think it's so beautiful. And it comes down to that intent, right? Like we don't hope to get one day to their wedding so that we can have the cake or anything. We just want to get them to a moment where they know that they're loved, they're cared for, and we're passing them on to the next phase where they can be loved and cared for. But I think that taking this opportunity now to say, like, I don't know if I can do this for you when you're 20 or 25, but I'm going to do it for you today because I know I can do it today. I think that that is the heart of these moments, right? Just to acknowledge, I love you and I honor you and I want to see you happy and beautiful. And we can do that today. We may not be able to do that when they're older, but we can do that today. And we can do a lot of other things instead of spending time mourning for what we can't do. What can we do? I think this is a perfect story to capture that. It's not something you'll ever have to mourn. You've done all that you can do for your kids, and they'll have those memories. And I think that that's wonderful. I was going to tell you a story of mine because my kids were young when I was diagnosed. Mine were 2, 4, and 6. And I was like you. I deeply believe in the honesty of life. I think that if we can't be honest in the most difficult moments with their children, then they're not going to expect people to be honest with them in the future when they hit difficult moments. And so I think we have to model honesty even when it's difficult, like you said, when it's the hardest moments. And so I've always told my kids the truth. And I sort of grade myself on my test. If my tests come back and I get a bad grade, I'll tell them, oh, I got a C- this time. I'm going to have to study harder for the next set of blood work or the scans or whatever, because it's a way that they can understand. But they've always had sort of the front row of what's going on in my cancer life. But they've been young. And then this year we've had 3 young parents die in our community from cancer. And then just last week, actually, my oldest, who's 14 now, had a nightmare that I was given 24 hours to live. And she woke up practically in the middle of the night. Since she's 14, she usually sleeps in. So she woke up really early and came and just laid in my lap and cried for an hour and a half and didn't say anything, doesn't want to talk about it now. But I asked her if this is something she'd ever worried about. And she said no. And I really think it was the first time her subconscious put all the pieces together, if that makes sense. Like, she's always known that people die of cancer. We know people all the time who are passing away because we are so deeply embedded in the cancer community. She's always known I had cancer. And now I am back on a traditional chemo. So we're talking about losing my hair, but I just think that between her age and the information she's seen and the people in our life who've passed, she, for the first time, maybe all those pieces clicked into place and she realized that this could happen to us, it could happen to me. And I think that with parenting and cancer, it's just important to sort of show up where they are, whatever questions they have at that moment, not to put in more questions on them and like confuse them or overwhelm them or give them your burdens for sure, but to give them the information that is honest and truthful. And then in these moments, again, be honest and truthful and say, I didn't know, of course, what exactly to say, what she wanted to hear, but I told her the truth. These are questions that we have, her dad and I, and we choose not to grieve in the moments where there's nothing to grieve yet, right? I am alive. We have tons of adventures planned. There's lots of good things ahead of us, but it is a question in the back of our head: when will sort of that time run out? And we have to make a choice, a conscious choice, to not dwell on when the time will run out, but instead dwell on all the time between now and then, and what are we going to do with the time that we have. And it was just sort of revelatory for me, just that she had come to a place of understanding or maturity that she has to start processing this now, right? This grief. And it's not something I want her to hang on to, but it is present. It is something in her now that she's going to have to just be aware of, that this is a potential in our life. And I just think it's important because people always ask, like, what age do you tell them, like, the big picture, the whole truth? And I'm like, I didn't tell my daughter, right? I didn't hide it from her, but I didn't tell her either. I think it's important that when they do come to that, or they do ask the hard questions, we tell them our own struggles with those questions, right? But then also tell them what decisions we've made along the way to help us process and deal, and how those questions have shaped our decisions around their life. And so I just want to share that story because I know this parenting with cancer is such a big question mark in the lives of so many people out there. And it's something you and I are just walking out every day.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, I mean, well, to acknowledge your daughter too, I mean, 14 is such a tough age anyway. And it is, a lot of things going on. And so, my heart hurts for you and her, because I just, those conversations. And I know that, we're a little bit, maybe a couple of years behind. And I have, my oldest is a boy, and, his feelings are just, I don't know if he has any feelings sometimes, but, it's hard, but we all just do the best we can. I mean, right. We're just doing the best we can. And then I think too, and when like mentioning, some of the stories that, you're, still making plans and you're still doing that. And then like, I'm taking my kids' wedding dress shopping and doing these things. I have friends who have passed away without the knowledge that their life is numbered. And we all know that, right? And we all know that, that there's a time that we're not going to be here, but most of us don't face that on a day-to-day basis. And then, so in that regard, you hear people say, oh, cancer is a gift and da, da, da. I mean, and it is for reasons like that. I mean, I wish I could have, this intention without cancer. And while as much as I thought I did, I mean, I truly didn't. I mean, I definitely make more well thought out, I make decisions differently. But I think too, with your daughter, and then, I mean, I have three, and then, all of my kids, is that your story is a little bit different because you had previously done the traditional chemo and, hair loss and everything. My kids haven't seen that. And so they haven't seen me look sick. They haven't seen me act sick. They haven't seen me, I'm still scuba diving with my kids. I'm still going on every roller coaster ride. I haven't been limited in any of that. I went back to work in February. I mean, I can't believe that, going into my, fourth year of, metastatic breast cancer, I decided to go back to work, and I'm loving it. I mean, I only work part-time, but like, they see me do all this. And so, like your daughter, I just don't know if there's going to be a time that I look ill, or I mean, I know statistically, I always say statistically because I don't believe in statistics, but statistically, I know there's a time where I don't feel well and I don't look good and I'm not living my life like I am now. And, I pray that it's much, much later, but I don't know if that's what it takes for them to kind of understand, because they have to see it. Because right now, I mean, I have friends, I cook dinner once a week and I have friends over, and my friends like will hang out in the kitchen and, I'll cook and they'll talk to me, and they're like, I forget that, you have cancer, because here you are doing everything for everybody still, and you're offering to help move and you're offering to do these things. And, and we're just all like, yeah, okay, sounds good. I'll take you up on it. Sure. Because I look and feel great. And I mean, they just forget. And I think that goes back to the beginning when you talked about what we look like now. I mean, we're living much longer and we're, not looking the sick patient. And I think that's confusing for a lot of people, but especially our children.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the shift for her right now, is because I did start traditional chemo. So I'm having down days, and we're preparing for more down days, and the kids all have chore charts to pick up what mom can't do anymore, and things like that. So I do think we are just sort of entering a shifting season, and it is a reminder of what hasn't been visible for so many years. Five years where there was no impact on our life whatsoever by this word cancer. And then all of a sudden we're moving into a different season, and it will be an adjustment for my kids because they were little the last time we went through this kind of moment. And so some of them don't remember me bald at all, or me sick. I'm really thankful they don't remember me sick for sure. But yeah, it's hard for the kids to watch us change, of course. And I think it will just make it a little bit more real in their heads what's going on in our lives, and for everybody else. And that's another thing. We've been living with metastatic disease for years. Nobody ever checks in on us, or and now like 14 times a day. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? I'm like, chemo was 10 days ago. I've felt fine for 9 of these days, guys, like chill. But I think that is just also the alert, like, oh, mom should be sick. Like, people expect mom to be sick. Something's going on here. And then that is a big shift in our lives too for the kids.
Well, that makes you feel better. I still don't have people checking on me. I mean, other than like you and a few people. And I know I like bombard your phone. You're probably like, Shana, stop texting me. I'm fine. But I was at a retreat this last week, and there was another mom who said that she's been living with this. She was diagnosed with a 9-day-old. She had a 9-day-old baby, and she was just saying that like, she has no friends. Like, nobody checks on her anymore. I mean, they don't even invite her out to do things. I mean, it's really sad, because I know you talk to sometimes about like the isolation of it and, the loneliness of it. And I mean, that's a real thing too, but that's a whole nother topic. I will say, when you talked about making plans and that your kids don't remember you bald or, before not feeling well, I think that is probably a big motivator for me, in that why I live a crazy, like hectic, anywhere the wind blows lifestyle. Because I hope that if I create enough memories of the times where I feel really good and we're doing really silly and crazy things, then those will always win over the ones of me, not feeling well or sick. and they have a really large catalog to pull from.
You guys are always on a plane somewhere else. You never know what time zone you're going to be in.
Either sometimes, like I don't either. I mean, I had a friend yesterday say, "Hey, do you want to go to meet me in Scottsdale? Sedona." I'm like, "Oh, let me see if I can make it work," and I could not make it work. But she knows that if anybody can, it's probably me, and I'm going to look at it and see. And it's not because we're wealthy. I don't want anybody to get an idea of that. It's not that. It's that we make a lot of sacrifices on other things. I drive a car that is about to break down. Every time you pull out, it like makes like a whale sound. So if you hear the car backing up, you're like, oh, well, there goes Shana on one of her trips. She should probably get her van fixed. But I'm not. I'm going to the airport to do something. I don't know, but you get one life. I mean, you get one. That's what I tell my kids all the time. I said, you get one life. I mean, I take a huge responsibility in that I tell my kids we have one family rule is to do the right thing. We get one life. We're supposed to make people's lives easier, and we're supposed to be kind. And, and that's it. So if we do those things and we can enjoy it while we're doing it, then that's what we do. So, if we go to Costa Rica, which I know you went, we hang out with the locals and we talk and we, say thank you for letting us use their land and letting us, enjoy their, their culture and all that. And I don't know, it's just all, it takes on, I guess like weird to find the words. It just takes on a whole new meaning when you're doing this. And that this is something that's like in that moment that you want to have something that lasts a lifetime, that can outlive you. And so I think that, all these moments, there's so many of them that they all feel so unique and so special because I'm counting on them lasting a lifetime.
Okay, but see, you must do that better than me. When I'm in the moment with my kids and we're traveling and they start whining about the fact that it's too hot or too cold or whatever, I'm like, we only get to do this once. This is like an important day. Stop whining. Like you must not have, there's one moment that I totally melted down. Not recently. This was right after I was diagnosed. So maybe I was a little less mature and a little more emotionally unstable, but right after I was diagnosed, we went to Hawaii and the kids were whining about having to get up at sunrise to go up to the volcano. I was like, we will only do this one time. Like, please just stop whining. My husband's like, calm down. There's so little, just they don't get it. I'm like, I know. But yeah, it feels like a lot of pressure sometimes to like, I'm in this moment. We're doing amazing things, but you don't know that it's a moment. Only I know that it's a moment. That's hard for me sometimes.
I take that. I know, I hear you. And I'm like, listen, I think we all have our moments. I think that's fair. And when we went, I had never been to Europe. I just went to Europe for the first time this summer. And we took a transatlantic cruise from Miami to Barcelona. And I did have a breakdown on the boat. And I yelled at my mom who was with me. And I took it out on her. Luckily the kids, weren't really there. But they were at the kids club. But I just said, this trip is for me. Like, I have never been to Europe. Like, this is for me. Like, there's not many things that I feel like I do for myself, but this is one of them. I said, I was just nice enough to bring all of you along. But like, this is for me. And she's just like, okay. She doesn't take me seriously at all. She's like, okay. But it was like, it really, in that moment, I felt as though, the kids are having a great time. And my mom was having a great time. I was the only one who felt like I wasn't getting out of it what in my mind the expectations were. But that was just one day. The rest of the trip was fabulous. And then, kind of fabulous. My mom did get pickpocketed and lost €1,000, and that caused a little bit of an argument too. But that was because she thought I was stupid for putting €1,000 in an EpiPen bag. But I told her to put it in the EpiPen bag because that's the safest place for it, because we're keeping up with the EpiPen. The problem is I gave the EpiPen bag to the least safest person, my mom. And so, this old woman with this visor on that completely looks out of place is the easiest target for a pickpocketer. And then we had to go back to the boat because we lost all our money and couldn't afford lunch on the, at the port. So we had to go back on the boat and eat the free chicken tenders. But no, so I have had those moments. And I will say, I feel the stress and the pressure. You mentioned the pressure, and I absolutely feel it on the holidays. Like, I feel like Christmas has to be perfect. I feel like, Thanksgiving has to be perfect. I feel like the birthdays have to be perfect. And then anybody who knows me and knows my life, I mean, there's not one thing perfect about it. I mean, there is not one day that utter chaos doesn't, rear its head. And it's not even ugly at this point. It's just, I mean, I think I'm starting to see the beauty in the chaos. I mean, I'm lucky that, it's chaotic. So I think that, but the pressure I do feel, and my kids do complain sometimes, but I just have learned to ignore it or put in a podcast or turn the music up really loud in the van.
So going back, you mentioned isolation earlier, and I do just want to touch on, so fear, isolation, and a broken identity. Fear is pretty obvious in the cancer experience. A lot of anxiety, a lot of fear around changing medications. Of course, we're on progression. Isolation, you mentioned earlier. Broken identity is this idea that the person, or really the expectations we had for our future, we can't expect for ourselves anymore. And so we have to adjust and become something different, or at least a little different shift. So in those three, do you experience any of that in your cancer experience?
Well, I would say definitely like the fear, I do a really good job at managing it most of the time. I know you and I are the opposites in the fact that you want all the data, you want all the results, you want all of that. And I'm like, don't tell me if it's not gonna like make me change today, or I don't have to do something differently. I don't want to know. I know that if in fact, my phone's right here, but if I look at my emails, I have 26,794 unread emails. I have 671 unread text messages. So that has been a result of the initial diagnosis, where I was getting results all the time, like texting me that you have a new lab result, sending me an email, you have a new lab result, and then seeing them. And in the beginning, I mean, and from stage 4 from the bat, right? I mean, right off the bat, just put me in stage 4, put me at the finish line, overachiever here, just sign me up. And so I stopped looking at all that. And so even since then, I don't look at anything. The doctor's like, hey, do you want to know your tumor markers? I'm like, no, I do not. I don't want to see my images. I just don't want to fixate on that stuff, because I feel like that would be more fearful for me maybe to know, which is weird too, because I feel like going into the scans, the unknown is the scariest part, right? The next day, I'm lucky, and within 24 hours, I have the results. I know, some people don't have that, but for 24 hours, that unknown is really scary sometimes. And then as soon as you hear what's going on, it's like, okay, well, it could be worse. I mean, I have I've had progression, I don't know. I mean, I've changed medicine. Now this is my, 5th line of medicine, my 5th treatment. So I've had, results quite, come through that were like that, but they didn't even seem that bad because they had a plan in place. They already knew their next route. So, I mean, the fear of that, the scans, I think that's probably it. Everything else I ignore. And then, I mean, I think some fear in, I know we talked about this at the retreat, this was a topic that came up, but just like, what are we most fearful for? And a lot of moms said, the fear of not being there for my children when they need me, right? The fear of like not being able, of like ruining their lives because of this. And my fear was a little bit different. And I shared with them, like, my fear is, what if my kids are better off without me because of all this shenanigans? Like, what if they didn't have to go through all this heartache? What if, and I know that sounds like a silly thing to say, but I just wonder, I mean, what's more damaging, right? I mean, all this that you're dragging them through, or, I don't know. It just made me think that there's other fears that could be. But I also grew up with a mom who doesn't allow me to be very fearful. You mentioned a dream that your daughter had. I had a dream, and I went to my mom, and I was scared. I went to her and I said, Mom, I had a dream that Dr. K gave me 2 years to live. And this was like 3 years ago. So this is, spoiler alert, didn't happen, thank heavens. But I told my mom, I said, I had a dream that Dr. K gave me 2 years to live. I said, do you think that that's like true? Do you think this is, some sort of like, warning or something? And she said, oh, she's like, I hope not. And I said, okay. And she's like, but it's 2 years longer than somebody has. I'm like, thanks, mom. Like, that's a really, okay, that sounds good. I mean, said like, this is like kind of the mentality I grew up with. So if I have something to worry about or I fear it, my mom does. She says, Shana, I'd find something else to worry about. Or she'll say 99% of the things you worry about never happen. And, there's no reason to be scared. And I mean, you can't change it. And so I do kind of take that. So the fear, there, it is there. I mean, I think that we're only human, but it's, for me, I feel like it's very limited and very specific to certain events. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Do you choose to live like the other extreme? Like, do you choose like just hope irrationally? Do you visualize things that are just slightly impossible, but you think if you just focus on that, you'll get there? Or is there another extreme, or you just live in a balance?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I'm ever really well balanced, but I'm pretty much so to the extremes. But I do think that, yeah, sometimes it's weird because I mentioned I had babies in a bathtub and outside the hospital. So I have been in a hippie community for a while too, like, like a crunchy, kind of group. And so sometimes from that you hear about like, oh, if you, didn't drink the icy, oh, if I didn't have that icy, I may not have cancer. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have had a lot of ices. But I also like think about, and then that like what you put out there, like if you claim this and you claim that you're the energy and all this stuff. So I do have a hard time sometimes because that comes in. I'm also like faithful, so then that comes in. So I try not to focus on the bad. I do try and, I know you always say like you're like irrationally optimistic or something, or and I feel like I've always been. I was like, oh, that glass is half full. I mean, mine is always overflowing. Like I don't care what the situation is. There's something that's taken it over. And so I can see the good in everything. And I don't know if it's irrational hope or if it's that. I guess I just try and see the good and try and focus on that versus the bad. But then I'm very much, somebody who's accountable for their mistakes and their actions and certain things. And I'm also very realistic. So I feel like there's a balance. I wish I could be completely unrealistic and just kind of in my own world. And but perhaps I'm out there in my own world, but attached to me somewhere is that reality. So there's not a balance. There is never a balance. It's heavily skewed one way or the other. But I do try and just, think about the good. And I do think that I absolutely know the secret to a happy life. And I feel like everybody should listen because I'm going to tell a big secret, but it's gratitude. I mean, I think in every situation, if you can find like even the smallest thing to be thankful for, that situation is no longer really bad. And so I have had to do that. So maybe, I don't know, you may would say that's like overly hopeful and optimistic, but I just think that there's too much good to really get bogged down with the bad. And I think that in all like the circumstances I've had in my life, I mean, as much as I used to like love to control things. I mean, you could go in my room and I didn't want anything misplaced. My sister would come in and mess up my stuff just to like aggravate me. But I just have accepted the fact that I don't really have control over anything. I mean, hardly myself sometimes, So I don't know. Maybe that helps. I don't really know, but you know me. I mean, there's no real balance.
You are always laughing at everything, even in like things people say to you and I would have been insulted or whatever. You just laugh and make a bigger joke out of it. And you're always ready to sort of forgive and embrace the good.
I do. And I think that, you talk about the loneliness and isolation. I know that that's like the next thing. And I will say, if anything, I've felt that more than anything. And you mentioned, I'm a very happy-go-lucky person. I love people. I feel like, I feel like genuinely connections with people and it could be the worst human in the world that has no friends, and I'll be able to find the one good thing that makes them a suitable friend, or that, something good that I can see in them. Because people shouldn't be alone. but it's weird because as much as I put myself out there, um, in this, I have often been like, oh, okay, friends, where are you? No one's, they're not calling, like you said, they're not, um, it's weird. I mean, they're not, and it's fine that they're not even showing up for me. Like, that's fine. But like my husband, like, I feel like somebody should show up for him. And I think of my kids, I'm like, oh, wouldn't that be nice if somebody said, hey, how are your kids doing? Or hey, can we take the kids over for the day and just like show them like that, like let them just, give you a break and give them a different space. Because as fun as we are over here, we're still in a cancer filled home, right? I mean, we're still, medications, or we're still, side effects and these things. So like, take them out, let them see something, different. And I don't know. So it's weird because I feel as though the loneliness and isolation concerns me in regards to who's going to make sure my kids are cared for. Because right now, I mean, I can count, and I'm lucky, I can count on, a hand how many of my friends, I think would be able to, like check in on the kids. But most people, I don't know. It's a society thing too. I know you hear people say they're too, they're busy, they're really busy. And I'm over here thinking, I get it. I mean, I get it. I have 4 children. We homeschool. I mean, I homeschool. We try and, travel. I work. I try and be a friend and try and be there, be a good neighbor and all these things. And it's like, I too am busy, but I can still prioritize. And then the thing that's really odd to me is that I'm sharing my time that seems to be the most limited resource. And I care enough to share it with you. And then it's like on the flip side, it's like, but no one's really sharing that valuable resource with us sometimes. And it's a hard kind of like, I don't know if it's like a eye-opening experience or not. And I think that there's a lot of things. Maybe I just, put myself out there too much, or maybe, I connect with the wrong people, although that doesn't seem very neighborly like or human like to me. So I feel like I don't have any regrets there. But you do think, I mean, I know society, we're different as society, right? I mean, we're different, we're, technologically advanced, and we're, social media and all that. And maybe people think that by liking a Facebook post or commenting on a Facebook post, maybe that's their way of, checking in and making sure you're okay. But I just wish that somebody would do more for my husband and my kids, because
I totally agree.
yeah, and they've also lost a lot. And it's, we're careful, and probably like you, like we're careful now, with, having like a low white count because, we're both, I mean, I'm on chemo. And so then you have to be more, cautious about certain things. And it's like, but no one thinks about that. And then, I see the kids across the street playing, and it hurts my heart because there's 4 girls playing across the street. And I have 2 girls the same age, and nobody came over to see if they wanted to play. And I'm like, y'all know, what we're living with. And even then you can't extend kindness. I mean, listen, I know we're a little weird over here, and my kids aren't weird. I'm weird. And I try and tell them, like, don't judge my kids because of me. Like, but it's, I don't know. I mean, you understand.
Yeah, I
Just
totally agree. I think that we've been trained essentially as a society to acknowledge the cancer in the patient. And no one's acknowledged the co-survivors, those living in the home. Our kids will be raised up and never have memories that aren't impacted by cancer. Our husbands are spending half their marriage with us impacted by cancer, and all the things that touches, it's very difficult. But beyond that, for me, my number one priority when I was first diagnosed was to surround my children with people who would love them. Because if I went away, if I died, I didn't want there to be a vacuum of love. I don't want to be their source of love, their only source of love. And I see a lot of children who spiral for years because they only had one sort of source of love, and that was the mom. And I want my kids just to be surrounded. I want their lives to be packed out with people who love them, whom they're safe with. And you can't do that after I'm sick or after I'm gone. You have to do that before. And I'm very disappointed. I've had multiple conversations with people who are important in our life, and saying, like, why aren't people showing up for my kids? Why aren't you showing up for my kids? You know what's happening in our life. Where's the breakdown here? What are other people not seeing? And I agree, it's a very difficult thing, because we want what's best for our kids, but we can't give that to them all the time. And this is another thing. The first time my kids went away to Camp Kesem, I was in a hard season of treatment, and they went away. And when they came back, they were so filled up. They had a college age kid who poured into them 24 hours a day for 7 days. And when they came back, they were like children again. They're lighthearted and playing and skipping down the road. And I realized that typically a typical mom would have been pouring into her kids, around the clock and all that. But I had to withdraw, had to rest, had to be sick in that season. And so they're a little depleted. They were very young at the time, and they were a little depleted because their sort of primary source of protection, love, all these things at that time was me. And so they weren't getting what they really needed, because I couldn't give it to them. I was sick. And so when they came back from Kesem, I saw that what they looked like when they were filled up again. And it just reminded me, wow, I didn't know that so much attention was being placed on me all of a sudden. And they were sort of losing their childlike state because of it. And so it's really, really important, for our children to be acknowledged, right? Our children to get special events, our children to have a little bit extra love and presents and calls on their birthdays, or all those things, because you and I and any woman in treatment, we do have half of our life, sort of half of our brain, emotions tapped out at some point, not all the time, but at some points during the cycle of treatment, because of everything we're processing for the sake of the family. And I think it's so important to see our children, to see our husbands, ask our husbands how they're doing. Take half of my "how are you feeling today" and give them to my husband and let people check in on him. Then we would both be a little bit better off. I think it's really important that we learn as a society to see the families around those of us impacted by cancer.
But I think, I mean, yeah, and you mentioned, I mean, we have immediate like family members who don't ask how we're doing. They don't ask how they can help. They don't ask if we need anything. They don't, it's just so weird to me. And it's hard for me because I think about it. I'm like, oh, if our own family isn't checking in, then who's going to, right? I mean, and I really appreciated the conversations that we had early on, because you prepared me for this, right? As much as you can prepare somebody, you prepared me for this time frame. You had told me early on that everybody comes out. Like, you get a diagnosis, I mean, everybody's coming. And, it's overwhelming because you can't bring everybody up to speed. And people, I mean, I don't know, I don't even know. I mean, they're coming from everywhere. And then it's like 3 months later, there's still some activity. And then within 6 months, I mean, you may have 3 people that are still, like regularly checking in on you. And I think it's hard because, and again, I think it has to do with the fact of, how we're living with metastatic, right? Like how we're living with, the disease, but then also how, just that, it just, our life is forever different, right? And their life is still going on per usual. So I don't know, it's just weird. And I don't know that my expectations changed on people, after cancer. It's not that. It's just that it became a lot more eye-opening, because you can, be in a place where, just trying to run around. I mean, there was a time back when we were in California too, like, having to go to appointments, and I didn't have anybody to go with me. Like, I was trying to go by myself. I had the kids, and luckily the owners of I Can Do That came over to my house and watched my children so I could go get an infusion. I mean, not an infusion, an injection. And I was like, wow, how kind. But these were people I didn't hardly know. I was just so desperate. I had to call and ask them if somebody could come help me. And I do live my life that way. That was something, and this was before cancer, though. But I do think that as humans, and if anybody who's listening, you may have already tuned out by now because of my shenanigans, but we should check on people. We should offer help, not to people with cancer, people with like anything, people going through life situations, or even people who we don't know are going through anything. We should offer help and say, let me help you. Let me bring you a meal. Let me do this before anybody has to ask. Because at the point that you're asking, you are so desperate that, I mean, you're at the point where you're, I mean, like you have to be pretty desperate to start asking for help. And I just feel like as humans, if we could just do that one thing and offer help before someone has to ask for it, I think everybody would be better off.
Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, those who offer help, we have to have a response. Like, yes, here's a space you can help, because I think that's hard too. We're out of the practice of receiving help because it hasn't been offered. And then we only get offered help when we're sort of in a, like you said, a desperate situation. And then it's sort of humiliating being like, okay, well now, yeah, I do need help. And I don't know how to fit you into my life. Again, how do you fit people into your life during the middle of a crisis, right? Those are things that we could build up before and around, so that when the crisis comes, you already have relationship, you already have understanding about how your relationship works. It's very complicated. It's more complicated than it should be, probably.
And you're exactly right though too. But if you build that in before you're in a desperate situation, then it's not so unfamiliar, right? I mean, if somebody brought you a meal, just because out of the blue, and then they're like, oh wait, you had a hard day, here's a meal. It doesn't feel so I don't know, like pathetic, right?
Like the spotlight's on your weakness, right?
Yeah.
The spotlight should be on relationship, not on weakness, right? Like, oh, you're so weak right now, you can't make dinner. Oh, I'll take care of you now, right? But instead, we should be shining a spotlight on, oh, you're important to me. I value who you are. I want to honor you and acknowledge you. That's where the spotlight really should be in these acts of service. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like, wow, we know that you're really bad today. You're not going to get out of bed. So, we'll show up today, but tomorrow you'll probably be good. So we won't.
You have people, it's so funny. You talk about like the way I laugh things off. I mean, these are funny. Like I have friends though that are funny because like Hannah, I mean, back when she said, oh, we know who to blame if it's spread because she's out there rubbing my breast trying to get this, mastitis out, right? Before someone ruined her trip. She also said, well, when are you going to lose your hair? And I said, I don't know. She said, well, it needs to be thinned out a little bit. So like, that's the comment. And then I have a friend, I didn't wear ear pods forever because I'm like, oh, I don't want to get cancer. I'm not wearing ear pods. And he'll be like, good thing you didn't wear the ear pods. I'm like, I know, right? Good thing I didn't wear the ear pods. So I just laugh because I have all kinds of, like random, like friends who make statements like that. And I do laugh through it. I will say that I find it, I know the intentions are really good and it makes me laugh because I'll have people call me and say, oh, anytime I'm having a bad day, I just think about what you're going through. And I'm like, oh, good. Because like my life is shittier than yours. Like you feel good about yourself. And I know that's not what they mean by it. Like that's not at all what they mean, but it's just so funny because I laugh every time I hear that. And I'm sure, do you hear that a lot? Because that's like one of those statements. I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely so. So yeah, no, it's you never know.
I feel like I should. You're going to put like a explicit like language.
So, yeah, let's think about what else. Is there any other stories you want to tell?
I don't know. I mean, I think. Well, I mean, I have all kinds of stories, but I don't know. I mean, I think when you were talking about living in a different like to extreme, I will say that I feel like some of my I've always been adventurous. It's not that, but like the fear of certain things, like I just don't have fear in activities anymore. Like I don't think my life's going to end because, I go swimming with sharks. Like, I don't think like that's not where my mind goes. So maybe in that regards, I live a little bit more recklessly. And sometimes, even though I may be a sinking ship, I shouldn't bring passengers along because like we did go scuba diving. I took Moxley. He got to go in Puerto Rico and in Costa Rica. So we went and the visibility was not great. And we should have probably surfaced way sooner. And especially because he's only 11 and, not like actually certified. He was just doing like a discovery dive. And then out of nowhere, there's like sharks all around us. And I feel like at that point, I should have been like, oh, let's get up. But instead, we go a little bit further. and now we can't see anything. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is where I die. And as long as he's okay, I'm okay with that. And then when we get up there and we're like, we surface, we're both fine. But I tell them all the time, he's like, were you worried about the sharks? I'm like, no, I was like, I think it'd be way cooler to die of a shark attack than cancer. So like, at least you would have a cool story. And I say these things not thinking that they're going to come back later. And then we were at a conference and we were talking about, he was talking about some snake that has some venom that is like anti-cancer, anti that. And I said, oh, I said, do you think I should go try that and try and get bit by this snake? And he's like, no, it'll kill you. He's like, but that would be cooler than dying of cancer. I'm like, that is true. That is correct. So, I mean, I think when I think about just some of the experiences we have and the stories I say and the one, like the messaging I share, I'm like, oh gosh, they're going to come back one day. And I hope that they're good and not completely reckless. But if you have any stories of mine that you wanted to hear that I didn't tell you, I mean, I'll be happy to share.
No, I think it's good. I think it's just this, again, it's like, you're not in, maybe even you are intentional, but in some ways you're not. It's just being you, just this idea of how to live with difficulties, right? How to live in it with uncertainty. There's some things you can't control and some things you really can't control. And your way of parenting and way of demonstrating that to your kids is just to laugh it off and shrug it off and, be thankful for the moments. And I think it is just a really beautiful way to raise your kids, and they will be relatively fearless because you're demonstrating that in your own life, both around cancer and all the other things that your family does. But that idea of just shrugging off the things that are like out there that might hurt us, but probably won't, and just going on. I think this is a really, really good testimony to your children. You're shaping the way they think, shaping the way they deal. The more information we have, the more the internet, controls our thoughts and stuff. We're going to be bombarded. That generation is going to be bombarded with bad news 24 hours a day. Anything they want to fear, they will be able to fear because there's so much information. But you're giving your kids tools around that information, being like, yep, well, if I need a cool way to die, I'll go jump into this snake tank or something. But until then, I'm probably going to be okay. Right. And so I think it's really, really interesting how you're parenting, how you're building memories, and really just chasing life as much as you can with your children, taking them with you, so that they look back on these years with such fondness, right?
And that's what you said it too, is that there's so many things out there to be afraid of. I don't want my kids being scared. Like, I just don't want them being scared. I don't want them, I also don't want them like being bitter. I know that, they just can't change it. And that's why I try to explain to them is like, we can only make the most of what we have. And that's it. We only can do so much. And I don't know. I know there's healthy boundaries. I'm not gonna, like be out there. I take parenting very seriously. Like, I know you may not, people that don't know me don't realize this, but I take it very seriously. And that's what, I do tell people, no one should feel sorry for me. You just shouldn't. Like, there's nothing, I live an incredible life. Like I've always lived an incredible life. And I feel like from the moment, it goes back to when I was a child, my mom, she said she would come home from work and I'd be standing at the door and say, Mom, where are we going? And she would, she called me Shana Go Bowman from the earliest of ages. So this is like just something that's in my DNA to just be on the go all the time. And cancer hasn't slowed me down. And I refuse to let it slow me down, even though you've warned me that there may be times when I can't actually do everything I'm doing. And I'm trying to mentally prepare for that at some point. I appreciate the realism that you bring me back down to earth sometimes. But with that being said, like, in my life, the only, and I mean this, the only thing, and I have an incredible husband, and this is not to take away from him, and I married him for a million reasons, but the number one reason is because I knew he'd be a great father. And for me, the only thing I've ever wanted to do in life is to be a mom. That's it. It's the only thing I ever actually thought I may be good at. And I was only going to be good at it because my mom was such an incredible mom. She still is an incredible mom, but it was, I wanted to be like her. I wanted to be a mom like her. And she's always been on a pedestal to me. Like, I just look up to her so much. And so when I tell people, I was like, I have lived an incredible life. And the one thing I wanted to do, even if for one day, just for one day, even for like 1 hour or 1 minute or 1 second, like the fact that I could be a mom, at least 1 second, is more than any of my wildest dreams of what my life would be like. And I was able to do it 4 times, and I'm continuing to do it 4 times. And, I have a 12-year-old, and then, I have my youngest who was barely, just turned 1 when I got diagnosed, is now 5. And 2 things I said to the doctor, I said, I want to raise my children. And she said, you're doing it. You're doing it. There wasn't any for how long. It was just like, this is what you're doing it. And then the second thing is, I want to live long enough so they remember me. And that's probably the hardest thing, because it's like, I think I'm so close. Like, my son's 5, there may be a chance, and maybe there isn't. I mean, but I don't know. But like, I remember having a 1-year-old that I was still breastfeeding and looking at him and thinking, I want you to remember me. It carries a lot of weight for me. So I'm like, okay, so that's like motherhood, so important. And then the other thing I say too is that because of my faith, I do think that if I was created for the life that I was going to have, like, I'm perfectly designed, because I may burn out fast, but I'm going to burn out bright. And like, that's just how it is. I've lived life to the fullest. I've lived more life, and I'll be 43 next month, but I've, lived 42 years with like reckless abandon and all the adventures. And I mean, there's nothing to feel sorry for me. I mean, like, there just isn't. I shouldn't be somebody's like pity, because I love my life. I love my life. Through cancer, I love my life. I mean, I live a good life. And I don't know. I mean, I guess no regrets. There's no mistakes had. It's just, we're going to do the best we can. And I'm living through it. I'm living with it. I'm going to do it as long as I can.
I love it. To wrap up, we mentioned a little bit earlier about whether or not cancer was a gift, but is there a moment, is there a story, is there something that you would consider like a gift from cancer, something you probably wouldn't have done in life, wouldn't have been able to accomplish except for the presence of cancer?
Man, there's so many. I mean, I feel like there's so many moments. I mean, the wedding dress shopping is one that, again, I had a friend pass away a couple years ago, or last year actually, with a brain aneurysm, and she had no idea. I'm 38 years old, but had no idea that was, her future. So the things that I've been able to kind of do with my kids and having that forethought, like, that's a huge gift. I think the other thing is that just feeling all the feels, like really being tuned in to like myself, but not only myself, is like, just because I feel so authentically, I think, and so deeply and so genuinely that, I feel like I get that from people sometimes. And after I was newly diagnosed and I was in Marshall's, this is, over in Danville, and I was walking through the store, and this woman had like tears in her eyes, and I was, and I walked by to start with, but I was feeling this like pull to her, like, just, it's like this like pull. And I was like, and my friend Stacey was with me, and she's shopping for shoes and stuff. And then I'm like, okay, I was like, okay, if she comes back through and I'm looking at her, I will talk to her. And I don't know what I'm going to say, but I feel like I'm like, compelled, like I need to talk to her. And so I was like, going about my business. And then she's coming straight for me. And I'm like, okay. And so I just asked her, because she was like sniffly and, tears. And I'm like, oh, she may be sick. But I just asked her, I said, are you feeling okay? And she said, why? And I'm like, oh, wait, I just completely offended her. And she said, well, I said, well, you're sniffling and you have like a little tears in your eyes. So I didn't know if you were like sick or not feeling well. And, maybe you're sad. And she started crying. And she said, yeah, she was sad because she was shopping. And as the holiday stuff was out, and, she was really missing her mom. And she said that, so I said, well, can I give you a hug? And like, I'm like so random, because I'm in California. Some people behave like this. I don't know many people who behave like this. I'm from the South though. I'm from Niceville, Florida. So I feel like that explains enough right there, from Niceville. But I give her a hug, and then she was telling me how much it meant to her, but that she was just really sad and this was a holiday and she couldn't believe I would stop and talk to her. And then I told her, I said, well, listen, I said, I was just newly diagnosed with cancer. And I said, I just feel like this, like something so much deeper than I've ever felt before. And, I said, 3 months ago, I wouldn't have stopped to talk to you, I don't think, but I'm going, and she said, oh, well, my mom had cancer. And I thought, oh, great, here we go. And then she said that she survived cancer twice. She died of dementia. I'm like, oh, thank heavens. Like it wasn't like somebody died of cancer. And it was weird because in that moment, I remember thinking like I was doing this for her, right? Because I just recognized this, sad woman. I was able to talk to her. And but it was never for her. It was always for me. Like it was always for me. Because when I said earlier that I have like a handful of friends I can count on, she is one of them. She calls me all the time. She wants to go with me to my scans in Houston. And this was a woman I met at Marshall's. In fact, she's in my phone as Lori Marshalls because I don't even know her last name. And just those moments have happened so frequently. I can't even tell you. It's like, but I'm very open with my story. I've never sheltered myself from it. I haven't sheltered anybody else from it. I feel like if I don't share it, then there's no good in it. It's just this toxic life. And that's not, there has to be good from it. And so, so I haven't shied away from it. So when I share it, it's amazing then what, freedom comes with that. And then from other people to feel like they can also open up. And I just don't know of anybody else. I met on the cruise, I met a lovely, I mentioned the cruise to, we went on, but I met a lovely flight attendant and her, her husband, who's a pilot. And Mike and I are flying down in September to Texas to go to a Pearl Jam concert with them. Like, it's just like it's just, just like I don't know, just the human kindness that comes, I think, and just the really being deep into it and invested in your soul, and maybe it's opening up to others, soul. I don't know. It's just a weird thing, but I feel very, and I know I said intentional a lot, but that's just what it feels like. It's just living a life with great intention. And so all of those are, huge gifts that I would like to believe that they existed, without a cancer diagnosis. And they probably did in limited, more limited situations and quantities, but this is an overabundance that, I don't know. It feels like a gift. These moments feels like gifts.
Well, Shana, thank you so much for making us laugh and encouraging us and just teaching us about this parenting journey that you're on. I know your story will be meaningful and encouraging to so many people. If this podcast was important to you and touched your heart, please check out our other episodes. There are a lot of people who are walking through cancer and learning how to do it as they go. I think you could be encouraged by many stories you'll find here. Also, if you want to dig a little deeper, we have multiple resources available at adventuretherapyfoundation.org. That is a nonprofit that I founded, and we're serving families impacted by cancer. We have online training modules about the emotional side effects of cancer and blogs and many other opportunities. So if you want to know more, check out Adventure Therapy Foundation.